Hello, everyone. This is Courtney Shipley from Brisbane, Australia, and you're listening to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast.
Welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast, a podcast dedicated to exploring the applied philosophy of traditional Stoicism. The College of Stoic Philosophers is an online school founded in 2008. We at the college endeavor to educate all who would be Stoics and Stoic philosophers who aspire to the good life within the world community. Podcast episodes will include discussions of Stoic history, application, interviews, and much more, all while having some fun, fate permitting. I'm your host, Mark Sterry. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Courtney Shipley, welcome to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. How's it going today, Courtney?
Yeah, it's really good. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here in, I was going to say sunny Brisbane, but it's raining, and that's not that usual for this time of year. Usually it's pretty sunny and hot.
And it's Friday for you right now, right?
Friday the 13th, actually.
Oh, it's Thursday still yet here in St. Paul, Minnesota in the afternoon, evening. Our dear friend Judy Stove, who's been on the podcast a number of times and very active in the College of Stoic Philosophers, recommended me reach out to Courtney to have a little chat with you for the podcast. Courtney is the organizer and host of the Brisbane Stoics. He's a drug and alcohol counselor and is a practitioner of synthesis of Stoic Socratic philosophy with modern approaches in psychotherapy. And we've had a variety of folks on that have been interested in psychotherapy as well. So I guess I'll just start with the basic question. How did you, Courtney, discover Stoicism?
Oh, it was a few years ago now. I think it was around 2017. So that doesn't make me an old hat by a long shot. But how did I get into it? I don't know. I think it was one of those gateway book moments. I think it was Alain de Botton, The Consolations of Philosophy, which just has some short chapters on various traditions. And one of them was the ancient schools, the Hellenistic schools of philosophy. So Epicureanism, the skeptics, and the Stoics. And like a lot of people who come across Stoicism, they say, oh, that sounds like kind of the way I already think about things. And that led to a bit of a rabbit hole. And, I have a bit of a personal thing where I was struggling with alcohol at that time. And like people who often struggle with alcohol, they don't know they have a problem. And so I was really fortunate that I had discovered Stoicism at that time, because I got to say very clearly, although it didn't really form part of the solution, it was very helpful to have a kind of like a philosophy that could form a new kind of worldview or lifestyle kind of approach to go forward with as I kind of tackled that issue. So that was useful and helpful.
One of my day jobs is I do a therapy dog work at the Union Gospel Mission, a homeless shelter here in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the recovery program. And they are very Christian faith-based program, which seems to work for them. And when I talk about either my experiences or talk about things in class, I try to hide Stoic terms and Stoic techniques with these guys without outwardly saying it's Stoic and without insulting their Christian beliefs. Was your recovery Christian based and you found a Stoic way, or when you work with people now, do you have a way to implement Stoicism in someone's recovery?
Yes and no. Like, there's a couple of questions there, isn't there? So the first, with myself, I didn't actually look for help. That was probably not very wise of me, but I have a tendency, probably like a lot of people in recovery, that try to do it themselves first. And I guess I was quite fortunate. I see myself as pretty privileged because I had a really good education and a good family and a good, background. So I have probably some of the necessary kind of supports in my life to tackle it myself. It was difficult, but yeah, I did that, and that kind of and Stoicism was helpful. But again, like I didn't feel like at that point that it could really inform a treatment approach. I didn't understand it well enough to kind of do that at that point. But now that I'm a clinical worker in a drug and alcohol role, sometimes I give presentations at the not-for-profit that I work for, and I have presented on Stoicism a few times, and it's a Christian organization at the head, at the board level. And I've noticed the board, the people like the CEO, they're quite interested in the Stoic values in particular, and some of the Stoic principles. They see a very good synergy, I guess, with their particular Christian uh, values, I guess. So I've had the CEO come up and talk to me personally about Stoicism, and I've handed him readings and the like, and that's been very good from a professional point of view as well, because now I have, these nice little conversations with the boss, and he tells me, for Christmas I just handed him a little booklet. I think it was Seneca's The Firmness of the Wise Man, and he bailed me up in the bathroom the other day, and he said, "Oh, I gave it to my dad. My dad's reading it at the moment. He's really enjoying it." So there's that. And how do I bring it to clients? I think very subtly and gently, because clients in that vulnerable space usually have well, it depends how you work, but I have a client-centered perspective, so I don't try to force my views on the client. If I were a Christian, I wouldn't be trying to force my Christian views on the client either. It's usually people in recovery. Um, not everyone, but a good portion of people will have some sort of arising spiritual urgency that they like to give voice to, and if you can nurture that, I find it can go in either direction. They might start talking about a transcendent God type figure, and then I guess Stoicism is sort of a bit of an alien perspective in some regards, because it's a different theme, but it still has useful, as you say, techniques and strategies probably. But if they start talking about a much more grounded sort of organismic approach, I guess I call it, then I think Stoicism is a good candidate for that sort of way of talking about recovery and things like that.
Can you give an example of when you're working with a client or at a class where you would drop a line of stoicism on people listening that are in recovery that they can see, even though you're not presenting it as straight stoicism?
Well, I guess there's two ways that comes up. The obvious blunt approach is you'll be delivering something in cognitive behavioral therapy, and you can quote Epictetus, for example, and that very well used quote about it's not what happens to us that matters, but rather the views we take of things. That's the obvious approach. That a nice way to offer up some stoicism, and in a related stream, slightly different, but Plato, for example. So I'll have clients that are struggling with the feeling, when they relapse, it's like all the good reasons they had, they forget. And it's like, how is it that I go through this process of forgetting? And so I sometimes tell them the story of, from the Phaedrus, where Plato describes the soul's descent from the heavens, where it forgets, it gets embodied, and it crashes to the earth, and it sees obscurely, and it's distracted by the senses, and it has to recollect or remember the world of the divine. It's not particularly Stoic, but I do know that the Stoics are informed by their interest in particularly Socrates' ethics, which, there's obviously a very strong connection there to Plato, because he's the author. So sometimes I take a bit of an eclectic approach, but to answer the more kind of subtle ways in which you can do it, I've tried to change the metaphors I use, so that when I'm talking in a therapeutic voice with clients, I'm using what I would call organismic metaphors. And I see the Stoics as being grounded in a very naturalistic, organismic, process-driven kind of worldview. So I talk about how well, I'll use seed terms like that, like a seed. I'll use terms like metabolism and process and growth and feeling rooted in a spot, and so on. And so I'm always introducing this kind of organismic shift. So as to instill in them a new language that we're not a fixed entity that has entrenched problems, and that nature is constantly growing within us to cause us to change, and that it's just a matter of trusting the process. So I constantly, so I have like the obvious surface level kind of way that I could introduce it, but then I try to do something more liminal or subliminal, where I change the way I talk.
I used something similar yesterday at my work at the homeless shelter. I'm not in the alcohol space. I haven't suffered from that disease, so I'm very careful how I tread on this. And they were talking in our beginning circle how one of the guys was saying it's important to be a good person and using all this terminology, and I jumped in and said how Marcus Aurelius said, like, let's say take a seed and plant it in the ground and it turns into, let's say, an apple tree or whatever tree he uses. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And the goal of that tree is to create the best apples it can. And when someone takes an apple, it doesn't ask for one back. And us as humans, our jobs become the best humans we can be. And that seemed to resonate with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been really helpful for me, is when I talk, I'm trying to weed out. See, there's a metaphor right there. Weed out, prune back my mechanistic um, um, analogies and metaphors, and instead replace them with organic, vibrant, verdant, fertile metaphors. And I can feel my organism kind of respond to that sort of language and settle in, and it gives me a deeper felt sense of my becoming. And I've even changed that from, thinking in terms of being, which is a static, permanent, unchanging sense of self. Instead, it's a becoming. It's a constant changing, shifting. Anything could arise in the next moment, and so when a client uses a strongly mechanistic metaphor to talk about their life or their issues or their perspectives, I might skew it slightly. Maybe this is where I deviate from being client-centered, and I'll put a kind of organismic spin on it, and I'll say, "Oh, you mean like a gardener who plants seeds, and then you've got to water it, and when the sun comes out and the conditions are right, the seed grows." I'll change it on purpose, and they'll usually go, "Oh, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I feel like I'm putting my roots down," and then I'll nurture. See there, I'm doing it again. I'll nurture that way of talking, and I'll sprinkle some fertilizer on it, and it's effective and it's powerful. And I think it's really important. I think the Stoics knew, they talk about how the mind, the way it uses impressions is that it transforms those impressions into propositional content that it sends to or not. So the propositional content to me is really important. So the way that you formulate the language sentences in your mind, you can train yourself to do that so that they have a more organismic feel. That's kind of how I've felt this taking root, growing and shaping within me a living organism.
That's very interesting. I appreciate that. So how does psychotherapy and Stoicism connect?
Well, just like that, I think it depends on your strategy. So, or let's call it modality. I think they prefer those sort of words. So it's, and again, we can only talk, I guess I can talk in terms of stereotypes, not in the, I can't anticipate what each therapist is doing, but the stereotypical CBT practitioner might be seen as mechanistic. He has a set of static techniques, procedures that you could manualize, because it often is. And then clients do these set pieces of homework and then experience, I don't know, some sort of change around that by challenging their thinking and their beliefs, and maybe putting themselves, challenging behaviors. And of course, I think that's very workable. It helps a lot of, as far as I know, clients respond well to it. It's the gold standard. It's evidence based, all that. But I guess my the way Stoicism has influenced me, at the very least, and clearly what I'm saying here is I haven't tried to manualize Stoicism. I haven't tried to kind of do the same thing that CBT has done, and kind of write line for line how you might deal with a client. And here's a set of exercises that need to be preserved more or less word for word. I haven't done that. What I've done is taken a more stoic, in my mind, stoic themed approach of the type that we've been talking about, where I think, well, what if the world wasn't a machine, a mechanism, but rather like a living, evolving organism? And that, there's a sense in Stoicism that there's a microcosm in the macrocosm, that man is a kind of mirror of nature. And that hence alignment's important because, you know, and even that idea of the daemon as a bridge between the man, his own individual use of reason, and cosmic reason or logos, and that kind of idea. So I'm always thinking in terms of feeling into the moment and being open to becoming what might arise in the situation, finding very alive, organic opportunities in the interaction to meet the client where they're at, to try and connect at a very deep and personal level with them. So my interventions, I do use cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing techniques, but for me, they're more of a helpful structure rather than necessarily targeted interventions most of the time. I'm sort of waffling, but that's kind of my problem. This is what I do.
I love it. I love it. Do you have any favorite or you find most insightful publications on psychotherapy and its relationship to Stoicism?
Well, Pierre Hadot, because of his capacity to kind of break the rules in a sense, he's not often giving canonical translations. You read what you've got the Inner Citadel behind you, and you can look at how he, through Michael Chase, I guess, translates something from the meditations and then go back and read it in the meditation and go, what the? That's not the same thing. Because he feels, I assume, that, he understands the material well enough and the background well enough. And also he trusts himself well enough. And that's important, the trust element, to do fidelity to the work that he's trying to unpack here. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about psychotherapy, is developing a personal relationship with Stoicism that's not dogmatic. I could probably get in trouble with some of this stuff, but not dogmatic, but rather reveals a deep piety, a love for the material that you allow to kind of take root in your heart and blossom and transform you and come out of your mouth as beautiful discourses, to use, the kind of Socratic vocabulary.
And do you use? I know you work with alcohol and other drugs programs, but also domestic violence. Does this transcend into that as well?
Ah, yeah, yeah. I think enormously, actually, probably more so than the drug and alcohol space. Because I work with perpetrators of violence, and a lot of them just don't know that they did anything wrong. Um, and it's a very complicated field because I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia, um, the definition of domestic violence has really broadened. So it's not just about physical violence, it encompasses things like financial control and emotional cruelty and so on. So a lot of people think, well, I never did anything wrong. I went to work and I came home, and if I was disappointed, I let everyone know about it, but I didn't hit anyone. And then they end up in big trouble, and so part of what Stoicism can do in that for that audience is help them to articulate different concepts of duty and of manhood, a healthy manhood can arise out of, I think, a contemplating the kind of Stoic message and the Stoic worldview. I think we have to be a little bit careful. I think one has to be sort of sensitive to the kind of Roman virtues in the background in some of the readings. Seneca and like can be very heroic and uber masculine. You've probably read On Providence, which I love, but I think you have to be a very clear and gentle facilitator when you introduce some of that material to that audience. And I think that's probably what YouTube does poorly, is it sometimes might like to try and reference some of the kind of ultra masculine themes, about being a gladiator and a warrior and, grinding it out, and God selected you because you're a powerful individual worthy of nature, the right kind of opponent. That could strike the wrong crowd the wrong way. So I think, again, this is where an intelligent and sensitive kind of facilitator might kind of pull out some of the gentler themes and the beauty and focus on that's true. That's definitely true, but it can be presented in a much more helpful manner, especially for men who are dealing with the justice system, because they have they've misunderstood what's required of them to be good men, which requires gentleness and I know this word is not a popular word in Stoicism, compassion, humility, depends how you frame these things up. But I find that when you bring these concepts in and you approach them in a good way, in a sensitive way, and you can say, well, the ancient Stoics thought that a man, would be, if he had a good sense of his duty and he truly loved himself, which is a big part of this sort of thing. If he could select what was best for himself, that would flow on, this idea of ikiosis. It would flow on and he would love the people in his family just as much as he loved himself, and he would also love his community then and so on, and that would build and flow out into the world around him. That's a much more gentle and humble and compassionate view that can incorporate those resilience and strength elements that Seneca is obviously touching on there.
When you mentioned earlier about dealing with men that don't realize they've done something wrong, what is an example of like a ancient quote in your personal Stoic toolbox or whatever that you could potentially present to them that would make them like given an examination of their conscience or realize what they've done?
Okay. Well, here's one. I often think of Epictetus. Is it Discourse 1.3? You're really testing me here, aren't you? Where he says something like, imagine if Hercules never had encountered the boar and the hydra and the lion. He would have lain down by the hearth, and he would have never discovered the strength in his own arms, and basically he would have never discovered that he was the son of the gods kind of idea. And so you can see there's a good example of how that can be misconstrued. But I say what that means is that right now there's a moment of adversity in your life and there's a decision. You can be angry at the world for what's happening to you right now. Or like, Hercules, you can accept that this particular Herculean challenge that's been given to you, given is the key term that I kind of try and point out, it's been given to you is precisely because nature wants to give you an opportunity to improve yourself as a man and discover what you're capable of. And that will mean turning inward and a self-examination process. And through that, you will find amazing resources and develop autonomy, competence, and a love of your fellow men. And that's what it means to become godlike in that sense that Epictetus is talking about. That's how I would deliver that, for example.
That's excellent. So I'm struggling with this myself. So when you discuss Stoicism and bring up certain Stoic quotes or ideas and people are interested in it that have never had experience with philosophy in general or Stoicism, and they want to further their studies on it, what is a book you would recommend them to get? I'm trying to
Right.
figure that out because I have people I discuss Stoicism with or listen to this podcast that know nothing about it, and they're like, what should I read first? And I'm like, I'm
So you
gonna
mean,
ask Courtney Shipley.
so the question, sorry, was that in relation to psychotherapy or just Stoicism in general?
Let's say both. Let's say to
Oh,
a
okay.
person you would know on the street that's interested, because some of these, it's real touchy with the modern Stoic and traditional Stoic and everything else. What's a solid book that you would feel comfortable recommending to the average person, and also in the psychotherapy space?
Well, first, I would probably split them up. I would say, look, if you want to get a good grounding in Stoicism that's not overwhelming, John Sellers, of course, Stoicism.
Yes.
You know that book? You
Oh,
guys
that's
teach
our
it in
textbook
the.
in our Stoic
That's
Essential
right.
Studies classes. He's been on the podcast. He has a new version of it. Love John Sellers.
Yeah. So 100%. And he's written wonderful articles too that are amazing. There's a really great article if you're interested in psychotherapy. John Sellers wrote an article called Roman Stoic Mindfulness or something. I think it's called that. It's about prosoche. It's really brilliant because it shows you the difference between what psychology tries to do with mindfulness and what the Stoics might be trying to do with their discipline to attention. Really, really great foundational stuff. Um, so yeah, I think I was going to say John Sellers doesn't really touch on psychotherapy, but he definitely does there when he's sort of critiquing gently mindfulness and offering us um, a different way of looking at it and preserving the core kind of principle of prosoche, the techne, prosoche. So it's easy for me to kind of go off on a kind of rabbit hole here because I think he raised a really good issue there too about the danger of certain um, popular interpreters of Stoicism kind of watering down or altering really important Stoic practices, like prosoche is a good example, and turning it into something that is just stripped of all its ethical or kind of phusis content, if you like, so that it's just another psychological tool. He kind of outlines in that article about how that's exactly what's happened with mindfulness. It used to belong to part of a richer spiritual tradition. Now it's just like a distress management tool. So he makes this really important comment that Stoicism shouldn't be reduced to just being a distress management tool or a technique for somehow inculcating resilience. It's not that. It's a deep philosophy, and it's a way of life, and it's a kind of these words are dangerous, but psycho-spiritual kind of practice or philosophy, if you like.
I like
So
it for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I guess to say, are there any good books on philosophy, Stoicism, and psychotherapy? They start getting harder, more technical at that point, I think. I don't think there's any, there hasn't been really any very mature thinkers in that space. Look, I'm sounding very arrogant right now. Pierre Hadot, I think, is really good inspiration. Much more technical and difficult, but if you're interested in psychotherapy, you have to read this book, in my opinion, is Martha Nussbaum's Therapy of Desire. And a follow-up to that would be Margaret Graver's Stoicism and Emotion, which, she's really using the same sort of language as Nussbaum. I think she was a student of Nussbaum. So, when you read those books together, but that book by Nussbaum, some people say they can't read it, it's too hard. I don't know. I don't get it. Like, to me, it's a work of art. It's beautiful. Reading that, I fell in love with Nussbaum. It was like an ongoing joke in our book club. I was like, oh, I love her so much. It's incredible. And what's so awesome about it is she has this character, Nikidian, who's sort of I guess, the point of view of the narrative that leads you through the Hellenistic world, and she walks you through each of the different schools. So and Nikidian joins Aristotle's Peripatetic school, and then she learns all this stuff, and then she sees some of the limitations of it. So she then joins the Stoics, and then she joins the Epicureans, and then she joins the Skeptics, and as a result, you get to see what might have happened in the Hellenistic world. There was a hotbed of like discussion and dispute and these arguments going backwards and forwards for hundreds of years. And she kind of centers it in this neat little book, which focuses pretty much entirely on the therapeutic aspect of these schools. That's what it's called, therapy of desire. It's really about, they believed, according to Nussbaum, that in the Hellenistic world, just as there was a medical art of the body developing, they also thought there must be a medical art of the soul. So she's arguing that that philosophy is a medical analogy. It grows out of a medical analogy, and that it was kind of a proto-psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. And it's the Stoics and the Epicureans who, without naming it, for the first time really discovered the unconscious, according to Nussbaum, and are coming up with techniques that penetrate more deeply than gentle dialectic can, she says. She says that's the limitation of the Aristotelian school, is that it requires this perfect upbringing, this aristocratic life with people who've already been well looked after and well prepared for civic life. But what if you haven't had that? What if you've been traumatized, or things haven't gone quite rightly? How do you penetrate deeply beyond the surface layer of the soul, deep down? And what kind of causative logoi, arguments can you use to kind of extirpate the passions of the soul? And this is what they're investigating. That book really turned me on to the idea of, like, how would you go about doing something like that?
That is fascinating. Since you did mention your book club, do you mind telling us a little bit about you and Judith Stove's famous online book club?
I wouldn't say it's famous. It's famous amongst about 5 people. Now it's
She said you talked about Candide the other day, and I just happened to do a deep study on Voltaire myself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we've been running it for 4 or 5 years now. It just perplexes me, though. This is going to be my little cynical rant. That it's like, Judith is brilliant. She's so erudite. She's a gem. She's what a mentor to have, And I'm no slouch either when it comes to philosophy. I keep up with it, and I have a bit of a background in it, and a master's in psychology and psychotherapy, and a background in psychology. And there's people in the group that can offer a lot in terms of learning, and we run this space for free. For free. And we say to people, come along and you can read this stuff, and we'll talk about it. Hardly anyone does. Like, over the 4 or 5 years, I swear to God, like, it's always the same 5 or 6 people, which blows my mind. It's like people will spend $30,000 on a philosophy degree, but they won't, join a group that only meets once a fortnight and read the short readings and essays so that they can discuss it and have these kind of one-on-one conversations. Anyway, that aside, what do I think about the group? The group's amazing. And I studied philosophy at uni, and I've learned way more about philosophy with that group than I ever did at university. It's one thing I can say. We've covered Boethius, Nussbaum, Aristotle. We've read a lot of Plato. We've obviously dipped into the Stoics and done readings from Seneca, and we've done, like you say, Voltaire. We've even done some of the Russians, readings from Dostoevsky and Chekhov, and we do nights on poetry sometimes. So we call it Let's Read Philosophy, Literature, and Psychotherapy. So sometimes we even talk about, we've read Freud, Civilization and Discontents. We've dipped into Jung a little bit. I could go on and on, couldn't I? Oh, Saint Augustine, his Confessions. That was great.
Is this open to like if listeners wanted to try out your book club, can they just look you up?
Yeah, it is private, meaning you have to go there and show interest. I was going to make it open, but initially I made it private. It turns out Facebook doesn't let you change the settings afterwards. In a way, that's good. That means that if you're interested, you make an effort to find it. It's called, we could put it in the notes if you have it. Let's read philosophy, literature, and psychotherapy. We record the sessions too. I don't edit them because I'm a bit time poor, so they end up being these probably overly long YouTube videos. They're 2 hours long. It's quite a selection of them. And I post them on the Let's Read Philosophy, Literature, and Psychotherapy page, YouTube page. We've probably got like 50 followers or something.
Do you
But
mind? Oh,
they would, it'd be a big effort to try and watch one of the sessions. But I've kept them all for posterity's sake, you know, like what if I want to go back in the future and have a look through them and pick bits out? But also my children, you know, I think they're not interested now, they're only little kids, but God forbid if I die, they can go, look, there's Dad going on about Boethius. That's cool.
that is cool. Do you mind telling us about your Procopton project?
Yeah, so that idea is because I'm the host of the Brisbane Stoics, and we've been running that for quite a while, 5 years, I can't remember, quite a while. And it's grown to about 30 plus people that come every month. It's only once a month, where we give different lectures and discussions on Stoicism. And one of the ideas I had was, you know, I'm always talking about these psychotherapy ideas, therapy ideas applied to Stoicism. Don't want to do it in a general kind of normal Stoic presentation format. So I created this little group, which would be like modeled around group therapy principles. So, you know, there's guidelines and confidentiality and things like that. Um, and I've run it about 4 or 5 times. And now I'm at a point where I really feel like the materials come together really well to suit a group setting. It's stoicism a lot, but kind of integrated with, like I've been talking about, some of the Platonic themes. Um, Obviously, not the kind of otherworldliness in Plato, the kind of you know, dualism of the Platonic world, but more grounded in the natural philosophy, I guess if you want to call it that, of the Stoics. But I draw heavily on these on process philosophy as well, which is, I think, a really good. It's like a lens through which you can understand Stoicism. So, and that's what I've been talking about. The process approach is seeing things as constantly changing. That kind of Heraclitean perspective, but turned up to 10, like amplified. And an organismic theme runs through the whole thing. So I've separated it into sessions, and one, you know, obviously it's like introduction to the organism, sitting with the organism, learning to somatically, you know, in your body experience disturbance, and then using principles of prosoche to watch the disturbance and to look at how impressions are used, but done in a much more experiential format rather than an entirely intellectual one. So there's homework around just feeling without interpretation and things like that, until people get very good at watching their felt state more than the intellectual elements of what's going on. Because there's a tendency, I think, in Stoicism to always try and do a kind of intellectual analysis, you know, and I think that's popular with cognitive behavioral therapy as well. But I've gone in the direction of people like Carl Jung, no, not Carl Jung. What's his face? The other guy, um, the client-centered dude. What's his name? Forgot. Mental blank. Um, and people like Eugene Gendlin, for example. Um, so anyway, the idea is that seeing the human being as having being centered in and in an interconnected way as an organism, a living organism that grows out of the earth, but deeply connected with a greater organism, which is the whole of humanity and the whole of Logos. So I do that in the group works really well because I can deliver it for free. And then, I've always had this problem that psychotherapy, unfortunately, isn't easily available enough to people because of the cost. It's too expensive. And that I think psychotherapy, if it really wanted to help people, and I mean, there's a difference, right? Like, I'm not talking about psychotherapies that are part of a healthcare kind of response to something like domestic violence or drug and alcohol. Fair enough, that's part of the healthcare system, whatever. But what we're doing here is something much more like Carl Rogers. That's who I was thinking of. The idea of actualization and developing a kind of, what's the word, expansive sense of self, maximizing one's organismic capacities, which are kind of my adaptation of the things that belong to us, F. Hammond. And I think that should be free for the people who want to pursue that, because I think it just makes better people in the world. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm hoping at some point that will spread. It's an interesting project because being one person running it, one cycle of the sessions held fortnightly will take me nearly 2 years at the moment. That's how long I've accidentally blown out my content to be. Yeah, it's massive.
Fascinating.
I've got 16 this kind of domains that flow into each other, and each domain is structured around a spiral to mimic the kind of becoming process. So it goes from a layer A, which is very non-technical, non-clinical, non-intellectual, just experiencing. Then you get up to B and then C, and at C you've got a much more kind of academically grounded kind of intellectual drift. But by that stage, the person's already learnt to trust themselves and be anchored in their deeper somatic experiences and so on.
Excellent. Courtney Shipley, thank you so much for being on the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Do you have a website or social media stuff that people want to reach out to you about the Procopton group or your online book club or more about you?
You'll love this. My website is, ready for this? philosophicaltherapy.com.au.
Nice. Thanks so much, Courtney, for being on the show.
Snagged that domain, didn't I?
Thank you, my friend, for being on the show.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. It was great talking with you, Mark.
Thank you for tuning in to the College of Stoic Philosophers podcast. Please visit the collegeofstoicphilosophers.org for information on the college, e-journal, and course offerings. Till next time, Procopton.